Team Heretics were the closest team in 2024 to winning a international trophy without actually doing it, making back-to-back grand finals in VCT Masters Shanghai as well as champions, coming oh so close to that ultimate prize in Valorant, but ultimately not getting it done. So as we look towards the future, can Heretics not only repeat that success, but build off of it and finally get over the hump and win an international trophy? That is the question that we are trying to answer today. We will be looking at their 2024 season, talking about how their season went and seeing if the future holds something bright for them. So this is the board we have today. Much like all of my other season debriefs that I've done on different teams, we will be starting with their 2024 placements. Heretics were one of the only teams that made it to every single international event this year. They started off very strong by being one of the more surprising teams in the EMEA kickoff tournament. They were really good in that tournament, beating the likes of Na'Vi to make it to the grand finals of that kickoff tournament, qualifying for Madrid, but unfortunately couldn't beat Carmine Corp in that grand final, and they came in as the second seed to Madrid, but it was a Swiss stage, so it didn't really matter too much, but you saw how good Heretics were. So then they go to Madrid, which was actually home turf for them. They are a Spanish organization, but unfortunately they couldn't bring it home. 7th to 8th placement, losing to Sentinels. However, this is a young team. A lot of people didn't expect this kind of strong play from them. They were a team full of rookies, players that hadn't played in Tier 1 Valorant to this point, aside from Boo, who was on the team in 2023, and Benji Fish was at the end of 2023, but he's basically a rookie for 2024. So the expectations were pretty low, and the fact that they already made it to the first international event of the year, beating one of the favorites in EMEA, that was a good sign. So even though they didn't have a great performance at Madrid, there was a lot more hype around this team than there was heading into the season. And unlike Carmine Corp, they were able to sustain their success into Stage 1. They ended up having a very strong Stage 1, looking like one of the better teams in EMEA, showing that consistency. And this is also when Woot came into the roster, so they were playing with Patatech as a sub until Woot came in, because Woot wasn't of age to play in the VCT until partway through the season. So Patatech helped them out and held his own, but Woot was always the plan. However, they entered the Stage 1 playoffs, making it to a grand final yet again, but losing once more. Losing to Fnatic in the grand final, a team they beat earlier in the bracket. So for the second time this season, they lost a grand final in their own region. But the regional grand finals, not as important. What is important is getting to the grand finals of the next international tournament. They did lose a game to G2, but G2 had a very strong run at that tournament as well. They ended up making it out of the Swiss stage, won their first match of the playoff stage, but then faced G2 yet again. And then G2 would do what they did to them earlier in the tournament and knocked Heretics down to the lower bracket. However, sometimes going through that kind of adversity can really help a team out, and that felt like that's exactly what happened for Team Heretics at Shanghai. After losing to G2, they go on to beat Foot Esports and 100 Thieves, making it into the top 3 of the tournament, facing off yet again against G2 in the lower final of the tournament, but G2 is pretty bad at best of 5s. So Team Heretics looking to not only exact revenge on G2, but make it to their first international grand final. They absolutely destroyed G2. One of the more lopsided best of 5s that Valorant has ever seen at the Tier 1 level, at least in my opinion, and they just absolutely destroyed G2, not even allowing G2 to get to 10 rounds on any of the 3 maps that they played. So then they head into the grand finals of Shanghai to face off against Gen G, a team looking to exercise their own demons. But Gen G, being the incredible talented team that they were, ended up coming back, tying the game, and then winning the match in 5 maps. Each map that Heretics lost in that grand finals was pretty lopsided in favor of Gen G. 13-6 loss, 13-4 loss, and a 13-3 loss on split to end that tournament for them. So they had a very impressive run at Shanghai, especially with the fact that Miniboo did not attend that tournament, their main duelist player not there. So they brought Patatech back for that tournament, and he played incredibly well for them, doing so well that it even brought up questions of having him stay on the main roster, maybe them running a 6-man roster, or just swapping out Miniboo entirely. That was not the case. Miniboo did come back, and Patatech was removed from the roster. However, in this tournament, what it showed is that Woot, who was mainly playing Initiator, could play Duelist, and not only play Duelist, but be one of the best in the world at it. Woot had an incredible tournament at Shanghai, being statistically one of, if not the best player at that tournament. Just insane work from this team. Again, a team full of rookies that are just absolutely cracked. Their team chemistry just really clicking at this point in the year, and it looks like at Champs they should have a pretty good shot as well. But first, to get there, we have to get through stage 2, which they did end up placing 3rd. You could tell that they weren't as motivated after that Shanghai loss, definitely just waiting for Champs for a chance to prove themselves again. They did perform well enough in stage 2 to make it to Champions. However, losing to Team Vitality to not make it to the grand finals of that stage 2 playoffs, not exactly a huge deal. They were still in Champs. And then Champions is here. They have their full roster. Miniboo is attending this tournament, so it's time for them to go on yet another deep run. In the group stage of Champions, they were put in a group with both Sentinels and Gen G, making people dub it the Group of Death. They first had to get through FPX, and after dropping a map, still ended up winning that match. And then they had to face off against Gen G, looking for revenge for their Shanghai loss. And they would get it after losing map 1, impressive 2-1 win from Team Heretics, knocking down the tournament favorites in Gen G, and that qualified them for the playoffs, where they would have to face off against Fnatic, a team that they've been able to beat during the year, but also beat them in some pretty big moments. And they were able to do that 2-0 victory against the former kings of EMEA, Team Heretics kind of stamping their ticket as the best team in Europe. They would then have to face off against Leviathan, a team that did have some pretty big aspirations of their own. It was a close affair, but Heretics couldn't get it done. Leviathan did beat them 2-0 on 2 very close maps. However, after that experience in Shanghai, lower bracket runs are no stranger to this team, beating both DRX and Sentinels to make it yet again into the top 3 lower bracket final. They would have to rematch against Leviathan, and this time they ended up defeating them 3-1. So we have yet another grand final for this team, this time at the biggest tournament of the year. They would have to face off against Edward Gaming, a Chinese team looking to stamp themselves into the history books. And after one of the best grand finals that I have personally watched, some very incredible maps, some lopsided, some close, Heretics doing everything they can to keep them in the match when Edward Gaming was just outplaying them. Heretics won the first map pretty decisively, but Edward Gaming took it back and ended up getting a 2-1 lead, and an incredible hero play from Boo ended up keeping them in it for that last map. They almost blew their lead, narrowly avoiding overtime in the second last map, and then they headed into Abyss. But Abyss was mainly the Edward Gaming show. Heretics would do everything they could, but it just felt like they were out of gas, and after an incredible play by Kane to basically bring them to map point, that was basically it. Heretics would lose yet another grand final, 4 total grand final losses from Team Heretics in 2024. That is as close as you could get to winning a tournament without actually winning one. So that is all their placements. You could see that they were just getting so close every time, but they just couldn't do it. Getting over that hump, especially as a rookie team, is an incredibly hard thing to do. It takes a lot of skill, it takes a lot of mental toughness, and that ability to push through adversity. They went through tons of it during the year, and they got so close, but just couldn't do it. Looking at some stats now, we will be talking about their best and worst maps. Their best map was easily Sunset. They had a 17-5 record. Attack was 59% win rate. Defense was 59 as well. So they were nearly unstoppable on this map, only losing 5 times on the year. And for their worst map, they wouldn't have to deal with Split in the last part of the year, but when they did play it, they were 5-7. Attack was 44%. Defense was 50%. It's not the worst record on that map, but it is their worst map statistically. The overall map pool is pretty solid. They don't have a losing record on most of the maps, and that's what elite teams need. You need a map that you can absolutely dominate on, like Sunset, and then you need to have the rest of your map pool to be very strong, very consistent, and not have a lot of maps that you're weak on. So Split being their weakest map, that's pretty hard to counterpick this team, because any map you take them to, especially with Split being out of the map pool during the later part of the year, very hard thing for your opponents to work around. That is a sign of an elite team. Looking at their total attack and defense rounds, on attack in 1,140 rounds, they had a 56% win rate, 640 rounds won to 500 lost. On defense in 1,227 rounds, they had a 51% win rate, winning 6 621 and losing 606. So they played a lot of rounds, more than maybe any other team. I haven't done the math yet, but they're at least up there. But having over 50% win rates on both sides, it looked like they were very good on attack, and their defense needed a bit of work throughout the year, but was still very impressive. Winning 140 more rounds on attack than you lost, very impressive work. This team is very explosive. This team has a lot of young, just cracked aimers, and it showed in their play. Looking at their best and worst regional matchup, they absolutely dominated Na'Vi, 3-0 against Na'Vi on the year. If you're a Na'Vi fan, you really hated this team because I think at least 2 of those matches were single elimination playoff games that knocked Na'Vi out of contention. For the worst map up, they probably don't want to face Vitality very much next year. 0-3 record against them. None of those matches of huge consequence, but still Vitality had a pretty good read on Team Heretics. Moving on, we have each player's individual stats of the year. This combines every single tournament. The team has announced that they won't be making any roster changes for the 2025 season, and it makes a lot of sense, especially when you look at the stats. Starting with Mini Boo, a player that came in as the brother of Boo. He was their main duelist player throughout the year, and especially when he had a slow start at Champions, there's a lot of talk about, hey, Heretics made the wrong move, kicking Patatek out and bringing Mini Boo back. They should have kept Patatek. But he did end up having a pretty solid tournament at Champions after that slow start, and his overall stats for the year are actually very impressive. He has an average combat score of 228, highest on the team by a good margin, 1,434 kills, 1,398 deaths, 410 assists for key ratio of 1.02. Playing, as I said, mostly duelists, going Neon, Raze, Yoru, Jet, and KO throughout the year, so one initiator character in there. And Mini Boo, I really don't have a lot of criticisms for his game. He's flexible on duelists. He can play multiple duelist characters to a very effective level. He looked great on Neon even before the buffs to Neon, and he looked solid on both Jet and Raze. Yoru as well, and he can play a little bit of Initiator with KO. So I really don't have a lot of complaints about him. I didn't get a lot of the criticism that he was getting during Champs. As soon as he got comfortable and as soon as he just locked in, he looked incredible. He was nearly unstoppable after that. Moving on, we have Rians, who arguably was their best player throughout the entire year, at least one of the more consistent players. He had an average combat score of 208, 1,625 kills, 1,572 deaths, 836 assists for a KD ratio of 1.03. Doing this while mainly playing Initiator, playing Sova, Gecko, Breach, Sky, and Viper. Especially at Champs, Rians really showed what he could do. Statistically, he was one of the best players at that tournament and just absolutely fried everybody. He's second in the team in total kills and doing this on a role that typically isn't the one who's meant to get a ton. But he was very effective overall, and just looking at his 836 assists, which surprisingly isn't first on the team. Boo actually has more. But it shows that individually he was doing very well as doing great at helping his own team. So he's a very dangerous player, and one criticism that I heard of this team is that they have a lot of good players but no superstars, which I thought was just completely wrong because Rians clearly is one of them, as well as Woot. I think those two can easily find themselves in the top 5 players of the entire world within the next year, if they weren't already in that conversation during the 2024 season. Which brings us to Woot, who did come in a bit late in the year, but really showed that he was worth the wait. Having an average combat score of 215.75, total kills 1,399, 1,296 deaths, 597 assists for key ratio of 1.07. Doing this while playing oh so many characters, I might not have even gotten all of them. He mainly wanted to play Initiator, but of course when he was the main duelist at Shanghai, and they also tried him on some other roles. So the characters that I could find that he played were Fade, KO, Viper, Raze, Jet, ISO, Omen, Reyna, and Sky. So he played almost every character under the sun, and he ended up being very good on basically all of them. He never really looked out of place, and as I said, his performance at Shanghai was absolutely incredible, and he had a good Champs. I don't know if Heretics end up putting him on duelists more throughout the year, maybe with Mini Boo, being a full-time, full-stay guy. maybe they keep Woot on what he's comfortable on in Initiator, but he has at least shown that maybe he's not as comfortable on other roles. He can still perform at a very elite level. So that is just such a dangerous kind of player to have, where you can put him on different roles and trust him 100%. So maybe he's EMEA's version of Forsaken. Moving on, we have Benji Fishy, who made his way over from Fortnite. He had to work through Tier 2 Valorant to get to the point where he is now, and he was one of Heretic's more consistent players throughout the year. He had an average combat score of 201.5, 1,745 kills, that's most on the team, 1,563 deaths, 440 assists for KD ratio of 1.11, the most on the team. Unlike everybody else, he only stuck to 3 characters throughout the year, playing Cypher, Killjoy, and Viper. So mainly playing arguably the best 2 Sentinels in the game, as well as Viper when it was needed. Don't really have any complaints about Benji Fishy's game. He was very good for them throughout the year, as well as he's their vibes guy. He really established himself as one of the best players in the entire EMEA region. Very impressive of him to swap over games from Fortnite and look very dominant within Valorant. It's a very impressive feat, and he's basically the glue of this team. When he's on, everybody else is on, and when his team isn't playing well, he's having some big moments to try to drag them back into the success. Moving on, we have their IGL in Boo, who individually had pretty decent stats overall. ACS of 171.16, which is pretty low in comparison to the other ones, but, you know, it doesn't really matter too much. He's the IGL. 1,467 kills, 1,538 deaths, 971 assists, which is the highest number that I've seen doing these season debriefs. He was mainly their resident smokes player, playing Omen, Viper, Astra, Brimstone, but then also playing some other roles with Fade as well as Sage. So Boo overall I thought was a very good IGL for them, maybe one of the more underrated IGLs in the game. And while his individual stats aren't fantastic and he's not gonna, you know, frag out on the server, all he needs to do as an IGL is play to a level where he is consistent, where he is at least serviceable, so that he isn't hindering the team with his own individual play. As long as you are playing to a level where you can compete, it doesn't really matter because your value is coming from your IGLing. And I think Boo did a great job helping develop this team. He was the leader of the team, being their IGL, bringing in his brother, being a very good spokesperson for his team. He is one of the best parts of this roster. So overall, this roster is just incredibly dangerous, incredibly scary to look at on paper. Everywhere you look, you have some very impressive numbers. Their only player under 1 for his KD ratio is Boo, but even then he's pretty close with 0.95, as well as just the sheer amount of characters that all these players can play. They're flexible, they're very young, they all can shoot. This team is built for success. I don't know if this is what the organization expected heading into 2024, but they landed on a gold mine with this roster. There is no reason why this team should not win in 2025. They are built for it. They now have that experience of making it to multiple grand finals and losing. Now they know what it takes to win, how much it sucks to lose, and that should really drive them and motivate them coming into 2025. There is no reason why they shouldn't win, but we've said that about rosters before. The way I see it, Team Heretics is going to take one of 2 paths. Either they become the next Fnatic, which was a team that, you know, they themselves got very close to success a lot in the early days of Valorant and in the more recent days. And then they finally ended up winning a tournament, and then they won back-to-back, and were one of the best teams that the game has ever seen. So Heretics could either go that route, or they could become the next Paper X, a team that everybody expected to win, but just never did. I really hope they end up being the former. I really wanted this team to win champs. I picked them to win champs, so that's 2 champs in a row where I picked the runner-up to win, so great, maybe I'm the problem. Don't know how much I'm going to be picking this team to win this year, but I absolutely expect them to win at least 1 tournament in 2025, maybe multiple, we'll see. Let's focus on the first one first. This team is incredibly deadly, and I can't wait to see how they grow. I think this team is going to be one of the best teams in Valorant for a very long time, if they keep the roster entirely together, which they are at least for 2025. So we'll see after that season if they still are in the same place, if they end up making moves. But that is a question for at least a year from now. So that's everything that I have to talk about when it comes to Team Heretics. Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think of this team? Do you think they're going to get over the hump, or are they just going to continue to get close but never over the hump? Please click the like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.